But tonight we are looking at the cost of crime and punishment. There are more people waiting on Nevada's death row than have been executed in the state's 148-year history. 12 people have been put to death since the death penalty was reinstated here in 1976.
And the state has spent millions of dollars to fund its death row, both prosecuting and defending suspects. Tonight, News 3's Elizabeth Donatelli begins an in-depth examination of the death penalty in Nevada by looking at the types of inmates sitting on death row and just how much they are costing taxpayers like you.
There are 82 men on death row in Nevada. Most are Caucasian, most are under the age of 25, most have a high school education, and many got there without prior felonies. But what they all have in common is a pending state execution.
And tried to contact an attorney here in Las Vegas. He has two names.
Meet the man once considered the most dangerous prisoner in Nevada.
And I had the whole matter straightened out at that time.
Patrick McKenna earned the title after multiple escape attempts, like his involvement in the 1979 siege of the City Hall jail, where inmates held guards hostage. He told the newspaper, quote, "I want to be heard. I'm not an angel, but I've also been victimized by the criminal justice system." McKenna was already in prison when he killed a cellmate, the day he was convicted on multiple rape charges. He's been on death row for 34 years.
That is a young man, a cold killer.
Then there's Bo Maestas. This is video outside a courthouse in Utah in 2003 before he was extradited to Clark County after he says a woman sold him drugs that turned out to be salt. He took a knife and attacked her daughters, killing 3-year-old Christiana Cowan and paralyzing 10-year-old Brittany Bergeron from the waist down. David Roger, who was district attorney at the time, describes the brutality.
We wanted them to see this case through the eyes of the first police officer who arrived and saw this little baby being cradled by her grandmother, bleeding to death, and young Brittany on the ground, unable to move.
As for his sentence,
the jury in the above entitled case have imposed a sentence of death,
sending him to death row, where he's been for the last 6.5 years.
Meets the initial criteria.
Fast forward to 2013, Clark County District Attorney Steve Wilson filed Nevada's first capital case of the year.
Nathan Burkett, at this point, he's an animal.
That's a clip from a video Metro released about Nathan Burkett, now an inmate in his 60s. He is the suspect in 3 local strangulations dating back to the 1970s. Recently, the mother of 22-year-old victim Barbara Ann Cox says she wants the death penalty.
I would just tell him, if I spoke to him, I would hate to be in your shoes when you meet your maker.
He served time in the deaths of 2 other women, and records show he set his own mother on fire. His most recent case has not yet gone to trial.
So the cost to send a person to death row, well, it's not easy to calculate. There are many expenses. That's from arrest to execution, beginning, of course, with the trial and then the lengthy appeals process. Now, we do not know exactly how much it costs to house Nevada's inmates like McKenna and Maestas, but the Death Penalty Information Center estimates the average cost to house those people is between $50,000 and $75,000 a year. And Jessica, there are more than 80 people in Nevada sitting on death row.
How much does it cost? It's an everyday question in the halls of government, a question lawmakers ask before they make most decisions.
But when it comes to the ultimate power of government, the power to kill a convicted criminal, one powerful lawmaker is not asking and actually stopped you from finding out how much it costs. News 3's Elizabeth Donatelli continues her examination of the death penalty in Nevada.
Well, Jim and Jessica, 2 years ago, the state legislature asked that question, how much does the death penalty cost? They voted for an audit, but Governor Brian Sandoval vetoed that proposal. Now, we know a capital case costs more than a case where the death penalty is not on the line, so we tried to figure out exactly how much more.
the jury in the above entitled case have imposed a sentence of death.
In August 2006, a judge and jury sentenced Bo Maestas to death. He pleaded guilty to killing a 3-year-old girl and paralyzing her older sister in retaliation for a botched drug deal with their mother. The stabbings happened in 2003. He was convicted 3 years later and has been sitting on death row for the last 6.5 years. We do not know how much this case will actually cost, but we do know when you add up all the legal extras of death row cases, defending them in particular isn't cheap.
We're talking about millions of dollars.
Public Defender Philip Cohn has been involved with some of Clark County's 70 pending death cases.
We know that it costs a lot more money to try to execute someone than if we just put them away in prison for the rest of their life without the possibility of parole.
Costs start with the lawyers. A capital defendant automatically gets 2 public defenders. A study by UNLV's Department of Criminal Justice shows the average death penalty case requires twice the hours of a non-capital case, which is about $212,000 more per case.
The law requires that we do a social history of our clients and of their family, and so that means getting mitigation experts.
Many capital cases go to the Office of Appointed Counsel inside the government center, where private attorneys are paid $125 per hour. It currently has 31 open trial cases that cost an average of $240,000 each to defend, which totals $7.4 million. And that doesn't even cover the lengthy, costly, and mandatory appeals process. By not prosecuting with the death penalty,
we can save a great deal of money.
Millions?
Millions. With 70 cases pending, we can save millions.
Most on death row are at Ely State Prison, where the average inmate housing cost is a little more than $23,000 a year. The Department of Corrections does not have an average cost of death row inmates, but the Death Penalty Information Center estimates capital offenders are 2 to 3 times more expensive.
About $50,000 to $75,000 per inmate per year, and inmates are typically on death row for 20 years.
Here's a breakdown of expenses for several states. In Maryland, 5 executions will cost $186,000. New Jersey taxpayers have spent $253 million over 12 years. If the governor of California commuted the sentences of those on death row, the state would save about $170 million per year. In Tennessee, death penalty trials cost an average of 48% more than those seeking life imprisonment. And between 1982 and 1997, overall, the extra costs of capital trials across the country totaled $1.6 billion.
The process is never ending. And so, I mean, it's a lawyer's dream, but it's probably a taxpayer's nightmare.
Senator Tix Segerblum pushed to find out exactly how much the death penalty cost Nevada taxpayers. But the governor vetoed the audit, citing concern that the bill was too vague and the analysis would not be fair.
Now, the legislature could act tomorrow, which would be the last day to vote to override the governor's 2011 veto. But Senator Tix Segerblum says he does not expect that to happen. He may, however, reintroduce a bill that would call for the audit of the death penalty once again.
82 men are sitting on Nevada's death row right now. Those condemned inmates are racking up legal bills and bills to house them in prison, all paid by Nevada taxpayers.
News 3 has discovered a new cost linked to ultimate justice, and we taxpayers will be getting that bill too. Elizabeth Donatelli continues her in-depth report on the death penalty in Nevada.
That's right. Right now, prosecutors across Nevada are pushing forward on new death penalty cases, adding to the dozens of inmates waiting on death row, some for more than 3 decades. And the last execution in Nevada was in 2006. And those costs keep piling up, even though right now there is no, as in zero chance of an execution in Nevada anytime soon. That's because the chamber was not up to code and is closed.
Nathan Burkett, at this point, he's an animal.
That's how Metro Police describe Nathan Burkett. In his 60s, wheelchair-bound and accused of strangling multiple women. He is also Nevada's first capital case of 2013 and just one of 70 awaiting trial in Clark County, which has the most pending death cases in the country. But here's the thing, even if prosecutors get a conviction, the state can't execute him because the existing chamber is not up to code.
The governor's proposing, I think, $800,000 to build a new death chamber in Ely. That's $800,000 we could spend on roads, we could spend it on schools, we could spend it on health care.
That's $692,289 to be exact. Last session, Senator Tix Segerblum proposed an audit that would detail the costs of a capital case and housing a death row inmate. It passed both chambers, but the governor vetoed it at the last minute, concerned that it would not be, quote, reliable and fair.
The key is no one is being killed right now. I mean, the death penalty is not being enforced. So we're spending huge, tens of millions of dollars on the upfront costs to convict people of the death penalty, but then they just sit on death row forever, which again seems kind of illogical to me.
Clark County has the highest amount of pending death cases of any jurisdiction in the country. In 2009, the DA filed 23 capital cases, 23 in 2010, 20 the next year, but just 5 in 2012. The year District Attorney Steve Wolfson took office.
Our homicide rate is down, but I think that in the 11 months that I've been the district attorney, my office is taking kind of a different perspective on the filing.
Wolfson points out that capital punishment is still the law in Nevada. He meets with 10 attorneys twice a month to review potential death cases, but says it should be reserved for the worst of the worst.
Does any of it have to do with cost savings?
It does. I think that as a department head, I have a responsibility to be sensitive to costs, so it is one of the many factors, but it certainly isn't the most important factor. I think the most important factor is justice.
Wolfson agrees capital cases cost his office more, but the financial burden weighs most heavily on the defense. And that's echoed by public defender Philip Cohn.
Well, I'm hoping the new district attorney will review the cases filed by his predecessor, determine if there's any cases that we can resolve. I believe there are. There are a number of cases.
Wolfson tells us he will not do a sweeping review, but does address individual concerns on a case-by-case basis. In the meantime, Cohn has to look for ways to trim the defense costs.
Will we better serve Nevada by building a death chamber, or will we be better off by, employing psychologists and psychiatrists to stop the next horrific killing?
Today was the last chance legislators had to try to push through the audit by overriding the governor's veto. Now, had it gone through in 2011, the report on just how much it cost, the death penalty that is, would have been finished about 2 weeks ago. Senator Tick Segerblum does say he may introduce the topic again in a new bill this session. Still, even without specific numbers, both prosecutors and defense agree these cases take longer and cost more.